Okay. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share this morning? Any comments or any questions?
I can share. I was noticing towards the beginning of class the difference in how my skull and my scalp felt when we were doing the rubbing, and it made me realize how much information there is that I don't usually take in, the distinctions. And I was curious about why that was, and just realizing that it felt like a lot. It felt like sort of that I had been holding it as a burden, like sort of things that were wrong or needed to be addressed or needed to be fixed. It felt kind of heavy. And so that belief system was preventing me from actually just taking in information like, oh, this side of my scalp feels more tense than last time. And yeah, also realizing that I have had this frame of low capacity equating with failure, and just really feeling through, especially the beginning of the Gold series, like felt sort of betrayed by my body, because I've had health issues and sensitivities and stuff my whole life, and and then kind of realizing, like, actually, it's my mind that's been betraying my body. I've had this standard that I've been trying to meet, that then I've sort of been like just dragging my body along the whole time. And yeah, just how much they've been kind of at odds. And then it was feeling like, oh yeah, the times when I sort of check out or start to feel rebellious, it's because I feel like I've already failed. Like I was starting to feel really tired in the second half of the Gold series. I didn't sleep much, and just feeling like kind of like I'm done. Like what, I can't, just not feeling like I was I don't know, engaging the way that I wanted to, and realizing that just changing. I had this image of a coach from when I was in high school who I felt like he really just believed in me and saw me, and just him watching me go through the Gold series, and then it flipped, and it was like, oh, it's actually just like doing the exercises to the degree that I was able felt like a victory instead of a failure. And then it was just like within that, looking for, what was coming to me. So wanted to share that.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good. It's the failure. If, not that there's ever a failure anywhere outside of actually just a lack of, this is like, I think, a very difficult thing to explain in some ways, because it's like very difficult to talk about it in a non-dualistic way where there's no judgment involved, because I think there's always, a tendency towards somewhere, which actually creates tension. But having said that, it's kind of like an interesting thing, just like we learn, like, throughout our entire life, to do something a bit better. It's kind of like the just nature of things, right? Like, you just learn how to do things better. And so you could call that an expanding awareness. And it's kind of interesting because we don't realize that when we're overwhelmed, like you kind of started with that, and overwhelmed, and we bringing attention to it, at some point we realize that actually the only reason it was overwhelming is because we were looking at too big of a chunk and we were trying to do it too fast. And so we realized that the error was in the mind, and or that the mistake was in the mind. But see, this is where I was trying to explain. It's so difficult to explain this because it kind of sounds like the mind's fault. Now the mind's a bad guy, right? So before the body was a bad guy, now the mind's a bad guy. And it's like almost like you can't get away with something being the bad thing. It's always like the problem. Uh, but if we go beyond that, and just kind of just think in terms of roles, and that when we misassign roles, things don't work. And it's kind of like better to think in those terms. Let's say, for instance, if like in a sports, like if you have someone who's defense and put them in forward, in whatever sports it is, yeah, you have an issue all of a sudden. They're doing things that they're not meant to do. And so it's kind of like that's a good way to kind of look at it. And the mind, another way to say it is that the Buddha said that the cause of suffering is ignorance. Another way to say ignorance, so most of the time people equate ignorance with knowledge, but actually when he was talking about ignorance, he was talking about lacking the awareness as to not understanding what is causing the suffering in the moment. That's a better way to understand ignorance. Just the lack of awareness, and it's kind of like basically the lack of awareness in the moment, and the lack of awareness, is created by what the mind thinks it knows. And the mind is a learning device, and the mind is always trying to learn, the best thing. So if it learned that what you need to do is push yourself hardest to try and become the best, and that's the only thing you can do to succeed. Well, that's not exactly the mind's fault, you could say. So the mind's doing its best job, and the mind's gonna be like, it's like to the body, it's like, dude, aren't you keeping up? And the body's like, it's like, I'm trying my best. And it's gonna be a constant struggle because of what we've learned. And that doesn't mean that we don't have responsibility somewhere, but we are also limited by what we get exposed to. And so it's kind of like, so Taoism actually always talks about this intersecting point between nature and nurture. And actually, if you look at spirituality in general, and the concept of destiny comes from that, where basically it acknowledges that what kind of information you get exposed to, you could say is luck or destiny. And that's one of the reasons why the teachings were considered a great blessing, because these kinds of teachings that increase awareness, can really help with suffering. And if you were never exposed to it, then you could never benefit from that. But whether you get exposed to it or not actually depends on chance, just pure chance, or destiny, depending on what you believe, how you want to look at it. So that's why these teachings were a blessing. But if we actually look at the teachings and the blessings, what we find out is that at the end of the day, it's about being able to handle the information that's coming to our system. And there's a lot. Handle the information that's coming to our system in a balanced way. And if we try and handle that information that's coming to our system faster, then we have to skim. And it's kind of like emails. You might cover more emails, but then the issue is that, most likely you're going to be missing vital information. You might read more emails, but then you actually are probably going to be making worse decisions because you're making them on an impression of the email versus actually having understood it, you probably will feel uncertain or overwhelmed because you haven't captured all the details. And so you're feeling uncertain as to whether you're making the right decisions, you're feeling chased, and so on and so forth. And so it's the same thing with actually demanding more of us beyond what feels actually comfortable for us. But then the world tells us that we can't be comfortable because we need to push ourselves. And so, it's kind of like, and then the irony is that actually it does yield result. If it didn't yield result, it wouldn't be an issue. The issue is that it does yield result. And then the question becomes, but at what cost? Yes, it yields result, but at what cost? Because the tension keeps accumulating, because whatever is unprocessed becomes tension, and then it becomes rather uncomfortable. And then, we don't want to look at it anymore. Like, kind of like, and it feels like too much to look at it. But it's kind of like a tangled up yarn, or I forget the name, but there's this game of sticks where, there's a whole bunch of sticks in the ground, and then you start untangling it one by one. And if you try and untangle it all at once, it's overwhelming. But if you just go one stick at a time, it's much more manageable. And especially at some point you start getting traction. And so if you become familiar with that, it's the same thing with actually our body. So by going through something like the Goal Series that focuses on a part of your system at a time, it gives you a chance to bring more nuanced distinction, as you said, like between your scalp and your skull. And then you start actually, and then it stops being overwhelming because this bunched up, vague, overwhelming energy, that the density that was there actually starts having more distinction and starts having more flow. And by, that was genius about remembering your coach. By doing that, you actually, again, made it safer for you to go at your pace. And as you started going at your pace, you started catching up with yourself, and the information that was unprocessed in your system started being processed. And so without having to make the mind a bad person, you're basically being educated, and you start to realize, oh, how can I work with my system in a way where I can redefine success? And where I realized that I don't need to be overwhelmed, and that I can actually have a really good life. And ironically, the secret is to actually follow my system. And the fear that oftentimes fall into, I'm not saying you do, but oftentimes people fall into is that, what if I'm too slow? That's like a really common fear, right? Because especially in the very beginning, we find that we're very slow. It's actually, the reason it's so slow in the beginning is because you haven't been giving your system a break so that it actually needs to be slow in the beginning. It's not. And so actually, if you give it some time, by the time it recovers, you'll notice that it's not that slow. Actually. The other thing is that most of us don't have the experience of allowing ourselves to work with a system. And so because of that, it's very ineffective the way we do things, because we're trying to do it like the way other people do it instead of actually following our instincts. And so there's a lot of different inefficiencies. Most importantly, by the time you enliven your instinct, you realize and you find out how you're supposed to work, you start realizing there is an inner genius that is unique to you. But, that's scary in the beginning because it's kind of like starting from scratch. And so whenever you're in a new territory, even if it's you feel behind because, you're starting anew. And I think that's the fear. I think that's why people don't start. It's typically, oh, I am this age. And then the idea is that everybody else must be ahead. But what I find is that when it comes to this, typically people don't start until their 40s. If it's early, rarely do I see people, sometimes I see people in their 30s, but really actually mostly I see people in their 40s to really understand the gravity of this. And then typically, people's discontent starts in their 40s because of all the accumulated pain. But, it's not until really later, any time between the 40s and 60s that people look at it. So, it's kind of like part of it, I feel, is actually just a developmental thing because it's so consistent. And so I kind of just wanted to just say, just to kind of bring more compassion, I feel it's great that you're noticing that. And now that you notice that the illusion was in the mind, the error was in the mind, kind of just look at, bring awareness to the mind itself as well. And don't make, I'm not saying you were, but don't make the mind the bad. The mind is lacking awareness and is looking for direction from your spirit, which comes from your awareness. And as you do that, your mind is going to start becoming aware of what it needs to spontaneously and authentically. And I feel like you'll find a lot more freedom like you did today, to a point where you realize the body that you have is perfect. Okay. So I just wanted to just say that to your sharing.
Much, Master Kim. Yeah, really, the context is really helpful. It's like, kind of reassigning blame. It's like, oh, the body was bad, and then just kind of ping-ponging that to then the mind being bad. But actually, from a non-dual perspective, it just is what it is. And how do you find your way through?
Yes. It'd be more than it is what it is in some ways. You could say that. I think that's for those people who believe that, but you could say, that's how it was meant to be because that was your path and your purpose. And everything, happened perfectly because, that was the best path to your purpose. And your mind's not at fault. Your body's not at fault. And I guess you could say, if you want to blame something, blame destiny.
Much wider perspective. Thank you, as always.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the conversation and the discussion. So, okay, very good. Now, I am at time, so I need to close here. So thank you very much for the sharing. Have a great day of cultivation and continued journey. And talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Master Kim.
Thank you, Master Kim.
Welcome. Thank you. Welcome. Bye.